Hi, I'm Dr. Emily Block, and this is Authentic Leadership and Personality. We're going to talk about finding a leadership style that feels authentic to you by looking inward and learning how to classify our inner selves. I suggest that by knowing yourself, you'll be more comfortable choosing situations where your leadership style would be a good fit. And as a result, you'll be more successful. So what is personality? It's the unique combination of relatively stable psychological traits that influences the various ways we think, feel, and behave. Understanding the dimensions of personality is useful to help us predict and manage our own behavior, as well as the behavior of others. A word of caution here: there's a whole industry devoted to making and selling tests to help companies differentiate people and categorize them from one another. How do you evaluate all the personality tests out there? How do you know the difference between a real test and one of the quizzes they give you in the back of Cosmo? That's where psychometric validity and reliability comes to play. Validity is defined as an assessment's ability to measure what it claims to measure. The validity of a psychometric test depends heavily on the sample of participants, including age, culture, language, gender, to ensure that the results apply to a vast range of cultures and populations. Reliability is whether a test is precise and free from measurement error, giving you the same result over and over, regardless of the conditions given or the order of the questions. Reliability and validity are determined scientifically, but an easy way to check reliability is to take the test twice under different conditions and see if it gives you the same answer. If it doesn't, it's unreliable, and unreliable measures cannot be valid. This is not to say that unreliable and invalid tests can't be illustrative. They can encourage you to think about yourself in a different way, and they can be used as a fun exercise, but I would caution anyone to use them in order to make big decisions. There are two types of personality characteristics: trait characteristics and state characteristics. Trait characteristics are those that are stable across an individual over time. They are the things you're born with, the things that don't really change over the course of your life. In psychology, there's really only one trait theory that stands up to the tests of psychometric reliability and validity, and that is the NEO 5-factor inventory, which is more commonly known as the Big Five personality traits. The most comprehensive way to classify personality is to understand your score across these 5 dimensions. The first is introversion-extroversion. People who are extroverted are generally excitable, sociable, talkative, assertive, and highly emotionally expressive. They tend to appear outgoing and gain energy in social situations. But you can't always tell introverts and extroverts apart by how they appear to behave in a social situation. A key differentiating feature is what being in social settings does to them. Extroverts, like me, tend to get energized by being around other people. Although sometimes when I'm sitting at home, I don't really look forward to going out to a party, I always feel happy and energized once I go. And I almost always don't want it to end, and I can't sleep when I get home. Being social actually recharges my batteries. Introverts are the opposite. Being social doesn't charge them, it drains them. That means after the party, my introverted friends need a period of solitude and quiet in order to recharge. The second dimension is agreeableness. People who are agreeable tend to have attributes such as trustworthiness, kindness, and the willingness to show affection. They tend to be cooperative and friendly. People who tend to be lower on agreeableness can sometimes seem aloof and unfriendly. They're less likely to get great joy and personal satisfaction out of helping other people. Although this sounds like a moral judgment, it really isn't a commentary on the innate goodness of a person, but rather their tendency to be perceived as nice. I see the difference of agreeableness between myself and my stepmom. Now, my stepmom is one of my favorite people in the whole world. I even named my daughter after her. But she and I are on opposite ends of the agreeableness spectrum. If we're at a restaurant ordering a drink, I would say something like, "Hi, how are you today? I was wondering if it would be at all possible if I could get a Diet Coke, please. Thank you so much." She'd just say, "I'll have a Diet Coke." Third is conscientiousness. Conscientious people tend to be detail-oriented, organized and goal-directed. They tend to be neat and tidy, prepared, on time, and on schedule. They would never, for example, have a typo in their syllabus like I do all the time. The fourth is openness. People who are high on openness tend to have big imaginations and broad interests. They are curious about the world, adventurous, artistic, and look for new things to experience. People who are lower in openness tend to be more traditional, like to have stability rather than change, tend to be more concrete thinkers. They prefer to have a plan more than just flying by the seat of their pants. Imagine the difference going on vacation with someone who is low versus high on openness. It would be the difference between finding hotels and adventures as you go versus knowing where you're going to stay every night. Trying a million different foods rather than sticking with the one you know and like. Finally, neuroticism, or emotional stability, is the last dimension. Highly neurotic people tend to be moody and anxious. They tend to experience stress deeply, have difficulty relaxing, and worry about a lot of things. People with low levels of neuroticism tend not to feel sad or experience mood swings. They don't get stressed and worried, and they often feel really relaxed. This is another one of those characteristics that feels value-laden. Nobody wants to be labeled as neurotic, but in reality, being emotional isn't bad. And I can think of a lot of circumstances where it would pay to be a little anxious and stressed. I always joke that my moderately high levels of neuroticism balance out my relatively low levels of conscientiousness. And that's the reason I don't miss as many airplanes as you might think I would. It's important to note that each of the 5 personality factors represents a range between 2 extremes. For example, extroversion represents a continuum between extreme extroversion and extreme introversion. In the real world, most people lie somewhere between the polar ends of each dimension. So everyone is neurotic. We are just neurotic to different degrees. These 5 characteristics are also universal and biologically oriented. If you were to take this personality test every 10 years over the course of your life, you'd get the same results relative to your cohort at every stage of your life. That isn't to say that personality doesn't change a little bit. We know that people become more conscientious and therefore have slightly neater rooms as they age and become more routine and less open over time. But if you're in the top 10% of conscientiousness at age 10, you're pretty much going to be in the top 10% of conscientiousness at age 70. In summary, the Big 5 is the gold standard for trait-based personality characteristics. All people fall within all these dimensions, and they are both reliable and valid over the course of your lifetime. Pretty much any other personality characteristic you will find will be state-based. Now, state-based personality characteristics describe your personality at a given time under a given circumstance. They're not stable over the course of your life and can change a lot depending on your experiences and the environment. These are tests that you can take over and over at different times in your life and get very different results. That's because they're not tapping into innate biological characteristics, but rather some more temporary features of your personality. It doesn't make them less useful. In fact, I find them exceptionally useful to understand how I've grown and changed over time and how I react to different situations. But keep in mind, just because you score one way this week, it doesn't mean that you'll always score the same way. One of the most commonly used personality characteristic tools is the Myers-Briggs. They use 4 categories, one of which we are already familiar with, introversion versus extroversion. The second, sensing versus intuition, differentiates people who take in information through their senses and immediate experiences versus those who do so using facts, impressions, hunches, and are more interested in future possibilities. The third, thinking versus feeling, compares people who make decisions based on logic and objectivity from people who make decisions on their personal values and the impact that those decisions will have on others. Finally, judging versus perceiving refers to people who prefer structure and plans and achieving closure from people who prefer flexibility, spontaneity, and keeping their options open. Instead of measuring on a continuum like the Big 5, the Myers-Briggs bifurcates each dimension into categories and gives you a 4-letter score that describes your personality. I tend to be an ENTP, but I can vary between that and an ENTJ depending on the situation. That's because my score on the JP, judging versus perceiving, is somewhere around the middle, and depending on the circumstances, I can fall into one side or the other side of the line. Lots of people have talked about your Myers-Briggs style and how it can inform your leadership style. For example, as an ENTP, my leadership pluses are that I'm energizing, open, strategic, objective, rational, flexible, curious, and pretty informal. My leadership minuses are that I can overshare, I can be hazy and nonspecific sometimes, demanding, scattered, unfocused. Yeah, that sounds like me. Thinking about myself through the Myers-Briggs lens can be really helpful, and thinking about other people through that lens can be really helpful in understanding their point of view. The challenge with this, and all other state personality characteristics models, is that it isn't written in stone, and you don't want to over-rely on an indicator that's likely to change over time. A second state personality characteristic that gets a lot of press is the notion of emotional intelligence, or EQ. This is the social and emotional characteristic that measures non-cognitive skills, capabilities, and competencies. It measures 5 dimensions: motivation, empathy, social skills, self-regulation, and self-awareness. EQ measures your ability to recognize and adjust to the emotions of others, but also measures your ability to understand and manage your own emotions, to reduce stress, and communicate effectively. EQ was designed as a complement to IQ for general intelligence, and has been related to performance at all organizational levels, particularly those where managing people and social interaction is involved. The big difference between IQ and EQ is that where IQ is relatively fixed, emotional intelligence can be taught. It's a good thing you can grow your EQ because some studies have shown that it's worth, on average, $29,000 in salary when you compare people in the same job with similar levels of IQ but different levels of EQ. Locus of control is another state-based personality characteristic that describes the degree to which you believe that you are in control of your own destiny. People who have an external locus of control believe that luck and chance play a big part in what happens to them, where people with more internal locus of control believe that their actions directly result in their outcomes. I think it's really important to recognize that culture and history of marginalization may have a huge role in shaping your locus of control. I spent 20 years in a very individualistic country, the United States. The American dream and the notion of dogged individualism feeds directly into the notion of an internal locus of control. And that culture likely shapes the fact that I believe that I can make things happen. But I say that as a white person, and studies have shown that African Americans have, on average, more external loci than white non-Hispanic persons, which makes a lot of sense given that I've never worried about being stopped by the police. I've had a lot of really interesting conversations about faith and locus of control, because isn't belief in God to some degree accepting that things are somewhat out of your control? I guess the point here is that in life, regardless of your locus of control, outcomes are only partially in our control and partially out of our control. But it's not really how much control we have, but how much control we believe we have that shapes your locus of control. And I can think of a lot of ways that can play into work. On one hand, I think I probably want a surgeon who believes that they can control what happens when we walk into the operating room. But I can also imagine that same surgeon taking it pretty hard when their patients might die, even though they did their best. The most important part of understanding locus of control as a leader or manager is understanding how to help people set goals and achieve them. Employees with a more external locus of control may need you to be a blocker to buffer them from some of the outside challenges so that they can see themselves as capable and controlling their own outcomes. Although one of my secret dreams is to have a personality characteristic named after me, I'm not sure that I would be happy if I were Niccolo Machiavelli, author of The Prince and namesake of our next personality characteristic. He wrote that all courses of action are risky, so prudence is not avoiding danger, it's impossible, but calculating risk and acting decisively. Machiavellianism is a personality trait characterized by interpersonal manipulation and a cynical view of human nature. People who are high in Machiavellianism believe that the ends justify the means and are more capable of keeping emotional distance from others. They desire status and control and are willing to manipulate situations and people to get it. Ask yourself, is it possible to be good in all respects? Are people generally good? Do people who get ahead in the world tend to lead moral lives? Is there a good reason to lie? If you answered no to any of these questions, you're likely a little bit higher in Machiavellianism. Really high levels of Machiavellianism have some pretty negative organizational outcomes. Higher unethical behavior, counterproductive work behaviors, and combined with narcissism and psychopathy, it makes up the dark triad of the sociopath. However, there's a case for a bit of pragmatic Machiavellianism to get things done in organizations. And in general, the average person with some Machiavellian tendencies tends to be socially central, well-liked, socially skilled, and really well-adjusted. Self-monitoring is my favorite state-based personality characteristic because it describes perfectly the big difference between me and my best friend, Fee. Fee and I have been best friends since we were 14. We met in grade 9, and we've been the closest of friends since. We call ourselves Friend Zero and even have little matching tattoos that are zeros. Well, they're mostly tiny little dots that look like moles because she hates tattoos, but they still count in my mind. I never fully understood Fee until I learned about self-monitoring. Self-monitoring is the degree to which behavior is driven by internal or external forces and explains the dissonance associated with inauthenticity. For me, I am who I am, and if you don't like it, go find another class. But seriously, if you saw me on the street, in a bar, at the gym, at a board meeting, or in my class, you'd pretty much get the same me. I don't really change my behavior depending on the situation too much. And that doesn't mean that I don't know how not to swear in front of my in-laws. I can regulate myself when needed, but that regulation causes me effort and dissonance. And if I'm not really trying hard to be on my best behavior, I really easily slip back into just being me. Fee is the absolute opposite of me. She's so attuned to her environment that she unconsciously and seamlessly adjusts what parts of her she shows the world depending on her immediate surroundings. For example, if we're hanging out in my living room and my parents walk in, she changes. Not a lot, but I can always tell. And when we talk about it, she says she doesn't even realize she's doing it. So people who are high self-monitors effortlessly adjust what they reveal about themselves based on the situation. Lower self-monitors like me can do it, but it takes a lot of work. So what does this mean? Unfortunately for me, research shows that high self-monitors are generally better performing and more likely to be promoted than lower self-monitors like me. Does that make me screwed? Not really. It just means for lower self-monitors like me, the important choice becomes what environment I'm working in. That is part of the reason why I love teaching, because I can be myself and it helps. It doesn't hurt my career. Risk-taking is another state-based personality characteristic, and it involves how much time and information you need in order to make a decision. My friend Mike Banner jokes that I'm somebody he calls snap-do, meaning I think of something, snap my fingers, and do it. Go to Oktoberfest? Snap-do. Throw a party tonight? Snap-do. Buy an Apple Watch? Snap-do. And sometimes it works out for me. Sometimes, like my Apple Watch, it doesn't. I spent 2 years really only using it for the Find My iPhone feature and then gave it to my sister. I didn't do all the research and think it through, knowing well that there was a chance that I wouldn't use all of its features. Interestingly, your willingness to make decisions with less or more information isn't actually related to the quality of your decisions. It's just related to what you feel you need to know to be comfortable in making that decision. I can think of some jobs where risk-taking, or decision speed, is probably a good characteristic. Fast-moving decision environments might not be a good fit for somebody who prefers to spend more time gathering information before making decisions. Finally, there's always a lot of talk around the difference between type A and type B personalities, mostly people saying proudly in professional settings, "I'm a type A personality." This state-based personality characteristic differentiates individuals based on their posture toward the world. Type A's are impatient, aggressive, competitive, achievement-oriented, hurried, and outcome-driven. Type B's are more patient, relaxed, non-competitive, more easygoing, and much less stressed. Type A's are viewed as productive, where Type B's are considered more creative. As a proud Type B, I'm happy to say that despite the fact that A's are really hardworking, Type B's are actually more likely to get promoted because they tend to be more creative, play well with others, and rarely trade quantity for quality. So what can we use all these personality characteristics for? First, I would argue that knowing yourself is a powerful tool, especially when it helps you figure out where you might fit in best. Second, Understanding these characteristics gives us a common language with which we can describe ourselves. It facilitates our interpersonal communication. And finally, I find myself using my knowledge of personality in order to get along better with people. If I'm going to have a tough conversation with a colleague or my partner, I often find myself going through some of these characteristics from their perspective. It helps me think about how they might react or perceive a situation. And often, I'm able to better understand their perspective and avoid conflict. Thanks so much for listening. See you next time.